Hello, everybody. Welcome to Screen Junkies Universe here on Fandom Entertainment. I'm Dan Murrell. I'll be hosting your show today. And what a panel. Look at this panel. It is sometime shortly before, on, or after July 4th. It's a great panel. It's sometime during the week. We're all not here in the studio, but we're still bringing you wonderful programming like this because we love you, honestly, and we like that you watch. We are going to talk about directors today. We're going to do a director deep dive. We're going to talk about what we on Movie Fights have started calling the I word, iconic. It is thrown around a lot.
Easy point right there. Easy point.
It is thrown around a lot, but we're going to talk about the meaning of what truly makes a director iconic. Who do we think could actually earn that title? And I have a great group of people to talk about it. First of all, Emma Fyffe.
Hello.
Emma, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Hello from the past to all of you in the future who are watching
exactly.
this.
It's like Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, great to be here. I'm ready to dive into what that I word really means. Because you're right, people they toss it around in Movie Fights a lot, and I'm not sure that it's necessarily always used. Not correctly, but you know what I mean.
It's thrown around.
Yeah, people use the term very liberally.
Yes, they use it very liberally. Also joining me, someone I fought last week on Movie Fights in the past.
Yes.
That has already happened.
And he won.
Maybe. I can't remember what happened. Greg Alba. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. It's nice to not be fighting at this panel today.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like 2 minutes in.
We'll
You've
see.
only done your intro.
I mean, I do watch I think in the past 2 years, I've watched every episode of Screen Junkies News, actually.
Wow.
So, I mean, I don't like
You've
watch
watched
them.
more than I have.
Yeah, I've watched more than the whole crew has. Well, I've been on other movie news shows, but for some reason, the vibe here has always been the one I'm most appealed to. The other movie news, I'm not going to talk them down. They feel like more like ESPN movie news, you know? Like, hey, we got to talk about the Wonder Woman 1984 poster for 10 minutes.
We're on a wing and a prayer here. Our chairs aren't even at consistent levels on this show.
That's what I like it. It's laid back. It's like podcast fun. I like it. And I've never actually done. I met Emma. I've talked with her so many times. But I've never actually done any videos with you.
We did a Movie Fights WonderCon panel together one time.
It will never be shown.
We didn't fight each other. Exactly. It's not immortalized on the internet.
Well, rounding out our panel, we've been trying to bring some great new faces to the show as well. And Maggie May Fish is returning. People loved you the last time. You're back. Welcome back.
It was a fluke. I will be terrible this time.
No, not true.
It was very fun. I had a lot
Thanks
of
for
fun.
coming on the show.
Of course.
So directors obviously are movie stars. Are out front. They're on the posters. They're in the movies. They're the faces you see on the screen. The number of movie stars that you could call iconic is hundreds of them. But directors, bit of a smaller list. So I guess we should start with some looking today, right now, today. Which directors could rightfully be called icons? Like not just popular, not just someone who made one or two landmark films, but directors who have crafted a filmography that is instantly recognizable in the history of cinema. There's a few. Stanley Kubrick
For sure.
is one that is thrown out. People feel like you know a Kubrick film when you see it.
I agree with that statement. It is definitely true. Because I remember like the first time that I watched 2001, which was in a music class in 7th grade. I had a music teacher that was obsessed with that movie. And so he made a bunch of 7th graders watch it, which was a great plan. But I do remember feeling like this was a movie that was like a work of art, that was somebody that had this very interesting vision. I didn't like it in 7th grade, but I respected that this was an important film.
Something was going on there.
Yes.
Well, I think with Kubrick and a lot of directors, what makes them iconic is when you watch movies today that are clearly aping or inspired by. Like I know one of your favorite movie last year was Hereditary.
It was.
And I'm like, there's so many Kubrick aesthetic touches
Very
throughout
Kubrickian
that
touches,
film.
yes.
I feel like a lot of art house horror in general often is reference to Kubrick's work in The Shining.
Yes.
Paul Thomas Anderson, There Will Be
Paul
Blood
Thomas
is heavily influenced by Stanley Kubrick.
Absolutely. And speaking of Paul Thomas Anderson, Martin Scorsese is another iconic director, I feel, because every decade he makes within the decade, he makes a film that's just iconic. Like, it's just what he does all the time. From Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, Casino, Wolf of Wall Street, The Departed. Like, I've never been more excited for a Netflix film like The Irishman. And like that is the most anticipated Netflix film I've ever been this hyped for. And I think of Scorsese, and I look at like Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, I was thinking about Boogie Nights the other day, and if someone had lied to me and said that was directed by Martin Scorsese, I would have believed it.
Yeah,
it just feels like it.
Yeah,
So
the tracking shots, the music, the everything else. Yeah,
we're always. I think like the best directors often influence people's work later down the line. That's how a good way to tell if someone is iconic.
Yeah. It's also interesting because I feel like, with Martin Scorsese, all his films feel like they're within the same universe, which is like, it's like, he has a very clear, distinct idea of how he sees the world, and he like repeats that pattern over and over. And then someone like Stanley Kubrick, his films, while they all have like Kubrick-isms, they do all feel very different. Like my favorite Kubrick film is Barry Lyndon, which is miles away from 2001.
Right.
And so for Kubrick, I think sometimes he's almost put at such a high level because it's like he is purely a director. He looks at each piece individually. He gives what that movie needs, which is like, that's very different than a director being like, this is my view of the world and I'll do it a lot forever. But even though that's also very hard.
I'm curious about this, what you guys think about this, because I think there are two different things that can make a director put them up in that upper level. One of them is style.
Sure.
And another one, and sometimes they go hand in hand, is personality. Alfred Hitchcock is a director that I think is as famous for his personality as he is for his style. You
definitely
can see the craft behind Hitchcock film, but he himself has crafted a persona. Orson Welles is another one. He has a persona.
Bay. James Cameron
James Cameron.
James Cameron has
100%.
now is maybe almost only his persona.
Do you think that's part of elevating some directors to that upper echelon? Is they don't just remember the work, they remember the person.
I think that's absolutely true. I would almost put Steven Spielberg in that category,
I would
quite
put
honestly.
Kubrick in that category.
Of somebody that just, is and in the case of Spielberg, he very much personifies his own films in a way. Every interview that he does, he still comes across as somebody that has this very like almost innocent wonderment, like a kid when it comes to filmmaking. And I think that is something that is certainly characteristic of the films that he makes.
Yes, I think to become iconic, you're hitting a good point. Like, even with today, I mean, I don't know if we list him as an iconic director, but it seemed like Jordan Peele did one movie, and now I see his face for like every produced horror movie.
Yes.
So this idea of like the director's image being put front and center, I think that happens even more now than it did in the past. I don't know if that has to do with like media marketing or something.
Well, that's part of it. We were talking about Midsummer, which is coming out, is out. We were trying, when we were doing the review, we were trying to find images for the thumbnails and images for the reviews and stuff. And David Pacman, who does our marketing, was saying that he was looking for images and stuff, but the only thing he kept finding and that they were leaning into so much was that Jordan Peele said he loved it. Everything about the movie that they were doing marketing wise was like their marketing strategy was Jordan Peele loves it. So it is weird where they're kind of now tapping into that cachet of like, if a director's popular, it's now becoming a marketing tool because it's like it has the stamp of this director, so it's
well, for the longest time Tarantino was the guy too that they would always reference. I remember when Hostel came out, because he had a producing involvement, it was like, Tarantino loves Eli Roth, so you must love him too.
Right. Well, and that's the director who combines a very distinct personal filmmaking style with a very distinct personality.
Definitely.
Is there somebody who we haven't talked about that you think is up there in this upper, not the jury's still out, not they're building a legacy, but you would say right now today, this is a director who is in that echelon of an icon of somebody who is instantly recognized?
I would say certainly in the world of animation, Hayao Miyazaki, who is one of the founders of Studio Ghibli. Though I also love Isao Takahata's work, who co-founded Ghibli with him. But he, and Miyazaki is another one of those people that like there's a little bit of the very distinctive personality as well as the very distinctive style of filmmaking, and he's somebody that I think expresses the importance of the medium of animation in a way that in a more eloquent and sort of articulate way than other directors have maybe been able to do it, which is this whole idea of, he works in animation because it doesn't limit your imagination. At the time that he started making films back in like the late 70s, you couldn't have dragons like we have in Game of Thrones, but if it was animated, you totally could.
Definitely.
And that he also stylistically, like thematically, his films carry a lot of the same message. You can watch something that he has done, and it's instantly recognizable that Miyazaki has made this film. When you have themes of nature and the relationship between humanity and the planet, and also having young female characters with very strong convictions at the center of these stories. This is all very, characteristic of Miyazaki's work.
Yeah. Anybody that stands out?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote down Jean-Luc Godard, not for any reason other than yes, I think he's iconic. I also cannot stand his movies. I cannot stand it. I can't stand them. I remember watching in film class, and my blood just started to boil watching Weekend. I was like, I hate this. But also that was his exact goal. And I remember just being like, I know this is what you want from your audience, so I guess this is brilliant because you're getting exactly what you set out to do. I've never had such a strong reaction to someone's body of work. But I do think he's iconic. So I guess I mostly wrote it down because I love Miyazaki's film.
Right.
So of course I want to be like, yeah, he's iconic.
Yeah.
But I guess for me also Jean-Luc Godard is iconic, and I cannot stand his movies. But
that's okay though, I think. And I think that's an important part of the conversation, is recognizing that, there are directors who definitely. It's the same thing with like a lot of Oscar films where you're like, cool, I watched that movie one time. I recognize that I got the emotional reaction I was supposed to, but I'm never doing that to myself again.
I think Orson Welles is one of those directors.
Yeah, for
It's
sure.
extremely important to cinematic history, but Citizen Kane is a movie that is very well regarded critically, but some people find it a little cold, a little inaccessible, and then his legacy is very much complicated by interference, studio interference, complicated by his own excesses, by his own, by the fact that he was a very meticulous person. And, I think the idea that iconic directors have to have a spotless filmography and a spotless legacy that's
unrealistic.
Because
I think anybody that is bold enough to fall into the category of being iconic, they're going to make some strong choices that bother some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are not being like, hey, maybe don't do that. There's no one on set being that anymore for them. So
I would say for today, actually, I think David Fincher earns it.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly.
I agree with that statement.
I don't see him anywhere here on the notes.
Well, I would put him as
he's right here.
contenders. I mean,
Contenders.
he's somebody that I would say maybe is still building a resume, building a case.
I mean, he's done like so many films. I know like his big first one was Alien 3, which I know wasn't well regarded. But it seems like every single film he's done since then has been pretty well regarded and is considered usually a great movie. I feel like he's done a large enough quantity. I feel like for some reason people might say Tarantino's already made it before Fincher has because of the Tarantino name, but he's done more movies than him. And I feel like every time Fincher does something, he always he delivers, and he's just as meticulous. He's known to have a bit of that Kubrick aesthetic in terms of how he directs his actors.
Yeah.
Like the 50 takes, like Jake Gyllenhaal has really complained about working on Zodiac for that film. We hear about the crazy methods directors do, and other directors try to ape that too sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I feel like David Fincher has, in my personal opinion, has already earned that staple.
Well, I want to get into the contenders. Let's get into the contenders. Before we do that, this is Fandom Entertainment. We are formerly Screen Junkies News. Hopefully you know that by now. This is Screen Junkies Universe. We're still on Fandom Entertainment.
Yes.
Are you still with me? You can like and subscribe. All of our stuff, we're here every morning, usually SJU. Sometimes we'll put up a review or a spoiler review in the morning, but 9 times out of 10 we're here on SJU. You can hit that bell and we will let you know. Thank you. There we go. All 3 bells. thank you, Ryan. We will let you know when we're uploading stuff. As I mentioned, this is the holiday week here in the U.S. where we're off for July 4th weekend, and we're still figuring out. We have a Spider-Man Far From Home spoiler review that may be up now or may be coming up later. We want to make sure that we get everything. So if you hit that bell, you'll know what we're uploading and when it comes out, because... Thank you, Ryan. Because you'll get a little notification. So hit that bell if you want to know what we're putting out, especially over the holiday weekend. But right now, what you definitely can watch over on the Screen Junkies channel, there is a Screen Junkies show about X-Men. We brought in a great panel, including Hector Navarro, one of our favorite comic book experts, Zach Stentz, who was a writer on X-Men First Class, and two of our favorite people, Eric and Julia Lee Wald, who were the showrunners on X-Men, the animated series, to talk about the Fox X-Men franchise, what happened, a little bit of a dissection about the movies so far, and then what we could see in the future. It's a really great discussion. Check that out. And movie fights, as we mentioned many times before, we'll be going to a more monthly schedule. The final weekly movie fight is a July 4th extravaganza. It is a last fighter standing for the belt. It depending on what day this is uploaded, it will either be coming up on July 4th or is already available to watch on the Screen Junkies channel. Either way, go check it out. It is a championship fight. I've seen there may be people sitting at this table who will be part of that fight. Maybe. I don't want to name any names, but it is going to be a fight to the finish, so you can check that out as well. And as always, there's links in the description below. You can find all this stuff. So thank you for watching. And Greg,
well done, promo.
Thank you very much. Was that vague enough for you?
Yeah, well done.
Greg, let's keep pulling on this thread. The contenders. So these are directors who, most of them currently working today, perhaps have been considered great directors for a couple of decades now. But perspective is tough. It's tough to say, especially if someone is still making films. You have your Spielbergs, who I think at this point, even though he's still active, has been making movies for over 40 years. These are directors maybe that have been around a little bit less. Let's talk about some of them that you think could potentially be in 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years amongst the Kurosawas and the Welleses and the Scorseses of the world.
Yeah.
Greg, you mentioned David Fincher.
That's a good one.
Quentin Tarantino?
Definitely.
Who else have we
Definitely a
mentioned?
great one.
Anyone else? Do you have a name that you...
I do.
Okay.
Well, yeah. Okay, so he's one of my favorite directors of all time, Peter Watkins. The reason I put him in this is because I don't think he's gotten the respect that I feel like he deserves.
Okay.
And I think years from now, we'll look back at his body of work and be like, that was groundbreaking. And that's probably why.
I'm not familiar with him. Is there... enlighten me. What are some...
Great. So one of his first movies was called Privilege, and it was about a rock star that was like a puppet for the government, and it came out, I think, in like the 50s, 60s, and it made a lot of buzz. My favorite movie from him is Punishment Park. It is a faux documentary about the United States detaining people for being un-American, and that meant whatever. It's very apocalyptic. Basically, the Hunger Games, pre-Hunger Games, that type of movie. But it was not scripted. He didn't use actors. He used real people. All the scenes are slightly improvised, but it is so compelling, and it's just a beautiful and terrifying piece of work that is amazing. And then I think his most well-known is probably The War Game from 1965. Again, it's a faux documentary about, it happened during the Cold War when it came out, and it was about what would happen if a bomb went off in Europe. And the BBC very famously didn't want to air it.
Yes, this story is now sounding familiar. Yes.
So they didn't want to air it because they didn't want to scare people. And Peter Watkins sent some very strong letters saying, but that's what's going to happen, so why can't we? I just think he's very like kind, but very unflinching in his what he chooses to make movies about. So again, I think during his time he was so controversial that I don't think he would ever really get that iconic status. But I think maybe in the future, looking back, we'll be like, wow, that was very brave work that he made.
Definitely.
Yeah. Emma, anyone?
I mean, sticking with my realm of animation, I think that Mamoru Hosoda is a real big up-and-comer in the world of, like, anime films, though, Hayao Miyazaki hates the word anime. I'm sure Mamoru Hosoda feels similarly. Some of his films include things like Boy and the Beast, Summer Wars, which is, honestly, in my opinion, Summer Wars is, like, one of the best science fiction films of this not decade, the post 2000s, but Wolf's Children, which is so good. There was somebody I was talking to the other day that like doesn't like Wolf's Children, and I guess because it's a kind of a weird story about like a human woman who's the father of her children is a werewolf, sort of.
Hot.
Yeah, exactly.
So hot.
it always comes back to everyone is a furry. But no, I mean, but his films also like they're similar to Miyazaki's in that, they have a very distinctive style about them. He also directed some of the Digimon Tri stuff. There's one of the things that I really enjoy about his films, there's a very distinctive color palette and art style to them. But again, like they're those stories that are very much fantasy and fantasy science fiction, but also ultimately are about like the human condition and relationships and found families, and I really enjoy his work, and I think that he just keeps amassing this body of work that ultimately is going to be remembered very positively.
Yeah.
Is there somebody like let's say a Spike Lee, or a Tim Burton? We mentioned Quentin Tarantino. So, this group of James Cameron, this group of directors that came to prominence, let's say in the 80s and 90s, that are just on the cusp, maybe.
I think
Coen Brothers.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Like, when I think of, like, we were looking at the first round of questions we had about the directors. Like when you think of Francis Ford Coppola, who's known as an iconic director, but then you think about his later films, which are not as well regarded.
Right.
I suddenly flashed to like Tim Burton for some reason. Like, his early films are amazing, and then his later films are not so much. Whereas Coen Brothers, I think about consistency, about like the quantity of films they've done and how well they're still doing today. I feel like Ridley Scott can be kind of hit or miss. Like he'll have a bad film, then he'll have The Martian, then he'll have a bad film. Like he flip flops. Whereas the Coen Brothers just seem so damn consistent, and they know really well their dramas. I feel like they got 3 categories: dramas, comedies, and westerns. They got like these 3 different versions.
And I think with Coen Brothers too, one of the things like you were saying about them being super consistent, it's also super consistent. Either you like Coen Brothers stuff or you really don't.
Definitely.
But there's you're gonna when it's like there's an unsaid what's going to be in the film.
Exactly.
But does the latter films affect what could possibly make them iconic, though? I
think that's a good question, and it's something that you have to look at. For example, someone like George Lucas comes to mind, or as you mentioned, Francis Ford Coppola, who in the 70s made
Godfather
3 or 4, The Conversation, Godfather, Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now, some of the keystone films of cinema history. Do you think that there's a point that you reach where even if you don't necessarily keep consistently either making films, Terrence Malick is another one. You either don't consistently make films past a certain amount of time, or perhaps as you've gone, your later work is not as well regarded. However, the stuff that you made in a certain era was so fundamental,
so monumental,
that it does that lock you in, or do you think that you have to have a more consistent stream of meaningful work to be elevated into this pantheon?
I feel like in the immediate moment you need a consistency, but I wonder if like 20
down the
let's say if Tim Burton just retired today,
Mm-hmm.
if 20 to 30 years from now we might just look back and like, oh, but Beetlejuice.
I totally agree with that statement because I'm with you. Like, I think of Tim Burton's more recent works and I'm like, yeah, they're okay, but then it's like, but man, like Edward Scissorhands.
Redwood, right? Yeah, like those early films. I think I honestly can't really answer that because we look at the last list and it's like Francis Ford Coppola is the only one I could think of who really had kind of a downfall in the trajectory. I mean, Brian De Palma, I feel like is still well regarded as iconic, even though he still works today, and his work has definitely influenced Tarantino's work.
Definitely.
I mean, a lot of directors have influenced Tarantino's work, but
that's kind of the point of Tarantino.
That's what Tarantino is. He's a directing machine of all that.
Sergio Leone and
exactly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like another director I love is Paul Verhoeven.
Oh
Right,
yes,
yeah.
I love Paul Verhoeven.
Like,
oh my god.
Heroica, one of my favorite
Oh
movies of all
yeah,
time.
I mean Starship Troopers, you guys. If it's not on your like top movies of all time, we have different opinions on films.
Yeah, he's so brilliant, but like also he's not extremely currently working. Whereas whereas Spielberg will pick up projects every year, even though they're again not as great as his form.
Sure,
but so I don't know. It's so different for everyone.
Well, and I think you're also informed by the age that you are and the times that you grow up in, because I throw out Lucas and Coppola particularly because I was born in the early 80s. And when I was first starting to learn about movies, we were, in the late 80s, early 90s, when it was seeping into my DNA as far as like Star Wars was 15 years old. Coppola was, 10 years removed from making Apocalypse Now at that time. And so part of the thing that I learned at that time, the knowledge, was that Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, and George Lucas are the three most visionary filmmakers of our time, because they were only this far removed from their keystone works. Now, somebody born 20 years later than me is probably going to have a different, because they were born 20 years after Apocalypse Now came out, or 30 years after Apocalypse Now came out. So I think that's also the weird thing is why you need so much distance, because everyone is informed by their age and their experience.
Yeah, I mean, I know we're not talking about actors, but when I grew up on Pacino and De Niro, like I watched all their films, of course, and then when I think about their work today in general, it's not exactly well regarded. But I still consider them like actor icons, Totally. And because of their early work. So I feel like the same can be applied for a lot of these directors who I know M. Night Shyamalan is a funny subject to me because he was like on the rise.
It's like that was truncated into just a couple films, like a whole.
If we were having this conversation 15 years ago, we would be talking about M. Night Shyamalan being the next director to join the group. And yet, it's weird how the worm turns.
It is very strange. And then, I think you have other directors who passed away before their time. So like for me, being born mid-'80s, like I grew up watching Jim Henson's movies. Like Dark Crystal and Labyrinth were my favorite.
I would put Jim Henson as icon.
That's how I feel. Yeah, that's 100% how I feel. But I do sort of wonder if like people born 20 years after me, they probably haven't watched Dark Crystal or Labyrinth. They're just not even on their radar. So it is really, it's interesting how, your own personal perspective plays into it.
Do you think part of being an iconic director also encompasses when they make someone a star, essentially? Or like, like Scorsese with De Niro, or even M. Night Shyamalan with bringing Haley Joel Osment to the spotlight, or Tarantino bringing John Travolta into Pulp Fiction and having a comeback, things like that. Do you think that encompasses something?
I think it goes along with their persona outside of the film, because it's like, and they're best buddies with one of the coolest actors, and they work together all the time. So I think it kind of almost goes to their like celebrity status.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting to look at a director's legacy, because a lot of times people will write a director's legacy in real time. And so I think for so long, the story of Quentin Tarantino was that Pulp Fiction will be his keystone film. That is the movie he made that changed everything. Like, that is the absolute corner piece of his filmography. I've recently revisited Tarantino's movies and going back and watching Pulp Fiction in particular. And then all of his other movies, I look back and I think, well, wait a minute. I think the movies he's making now might be the ones that are going to be the hallmark of his legacy. And his earlier films, which at the time were like, that's Tarantino and that's what he's going to be remembered for, I think there's certainly, there's a reason that they broke out, but I think history has not been kind to all of them necessarily. I think just culturally, if you look at some of them, you're like, ooh, whoa, okay. And that happens a lot. Even the greatest films in the world have elements of them that you look back 15, 20 years later and even more, and you go like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's it's interesting to see how even in real time a director's legacy will change from this is what they are to like this is a part of what they are, but maybe this is the big picture.
I mean, you look at somebody like a John Hughes, and obviously, like, his films are so characteristic of being a teenager in the 80s.
Yes.
Some of them have not aged very well, and then you look at like teen films of our times. I bring up the example of like Olivia Wilde, Booksmart,
Right.
where it's like that's so characteristic of our own time, but also because it is made with a more modern sensibility, it has some sort of things that are similar thematically, but don't suffer from a less woke time.
Yeah.
Well, because it is so difficult to talk about in real time which directors are going to be great, let's do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about...
We'll show you how to do it, right?
Exactly. These are all going to be completely accurate predictions.
Completely accurate.
But let's talk about the new class.
Yes.
Your Nolans of the world, your
Yeah.
Edgar Wrights of the world, but even more recent, potentially, like who now is perhaps hasn't broken out yet or is just beginning to break out and build their legacy. Who do you think is going to make it?
I know
Who do you think has a good
I
shot?
brought him up earlier, but I really do believe in a rule of three, not just in comedy, but just in general for actors and directors. I know Jordan Peele did Get Out, he did Us.
Yeah.
I feel like if he hits the mark with a third film, then he has a shot of like really having that long-lasting legacy and not just being remembered for his first two films.
Definitely.
Jordan Peele, I think, is a good contender for that.
Yeah.
Wes Anderson, yeah.
But Wes Anderson's one that I think strangely has... Maybe it's because he's not a prolific filmmaker, and it may take a while. You have to look at it in total, and he's building his resume very slowly.
True.
But that's one that I think 10 years ago, even people would say, like, Wes Anderson.
Definitely.
And now,
I definitely agree.
you don't hear that name as often.
Because I think it was one of those things where when he broke out his approach to filmmaking, like stylistically, again, like I obviously am somebody that gravitates towards very stylistic directors, and Wes Anderson is definitely that. But I think that, again, it was like he like broke out with his first couple of movies, and then we all went, oh, okay, we get it.
Yeah.
You know?
Well,
Oh,
I
okay.
mean, you guys did an honest trailer. I remember this now. You guys did an honest trailer for every Wes Anderson movie.
Yes.
And that breakdown
Yes.
is so accurate. And I'm like, that is every Wes Anderson
so
movie. You know?
true.
Yeah, so that is true. That probably does hinder it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to bring up for sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, she's just made her directorial debut, Olivia Wilde, with Booksmart. But when I saw that movie, I felt really seen. I felt like this is somebody that had a really similar experience to me as a teenager and is telling this great story about, you know, just like... teenage girls and people having the wrong perceptions of one another. I mean, the scene in the beginning of the movie where she's running around school asking everybody where they got into college, I just felt like, oh my God, that was me.
Right.
That I
Right.
was that asshole who like had this horrible notion of my, you know, popular classmates or whatnot. And so again, it's like, I really think that I'm really excited to see more of her work. I also think that there is something to be said for like a great romantic comedy director, and I think that we definitely are seeing that in again it was her directorial debut, but with Nahnatchka Khan with Always Be My Maybe, where it's like, and because like a really good romantic comedy is a really good film, it really is, and again it's just and once again that was another movie where even though obviously the point of that movie was there was so much Asian American representation, I also felt very represented by the character of Sasha. I was like, I have that woman's sort of mindset. So I think for me, it's especially in this day and age where we're now seeing women making movies about women. I think there's certainly going to be a breakout amongst that pack.
Backing off of that, I think another director that and she hasn't made very many films, but I mean, my God, Dee Reese, who did yes, Mudbound. If you have not seen it, please watch it. It is so good. But what I think she's very intellectual, and I do love I love directors like that who just can get very like But the emotion that she conveys through her visual choices, all the characters' dialogue is very understated, but it's just like seeping with emotion. And I think it's very cool nowadays to have very cool films that, you know, the Fast and Furiouses of the world don't really jump into that realm, but it so bravely is very. It's great. And then I just read that she has a fantasy musical that is her own script, and that's her next project.
Dang.
And that sounds so ambitious that I'm just so excited to see what that is. And that sounds like someone who's leaning towards the area of being iconic or big to take such big risks for their next film.
Well,
I'll throw two into the new class as far as one or two movies, and one of them is Ari Aster. Who did Hereditary, which I loved, and then Midsummer, which is out, which I think is whatever opinion you have with it, I'll probably agree with you, but I think it is a fascinating movie. And then Jennifer Kent, who directed The Babadook, which is a very scary movie. She has another movie called Nightingale that's getting released this year. I haven't really seen much about it as far as knowing a whole lot, but I think that if she can consistently deliver movies like The Babadook and build on that, I think you can really build a filmography there. But
I haven't seen The Destroyer yet, but I love
Karin Kusama.
I watched The Invitation like last year, and like just then going down the work of like Jennifer's Body, which is
Jennifer's
funny,
Body is so
the movie
good.
wasn't liked when it came out, and then over time it's gotten all this praise.
Yes.
And The Invitation to me, I thought was just freaking brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
It's a crazy movie.
I don't want to leave Taika Waititi out of this discussion because I feel very strongly that Taika Waititi is somebody that obviously comes in with such a personality. Like he's another one of those directors that it's like he's putting his personality into his movies, and it is great.
I feel like this topic can go on forever.
Yes, it really can.
Edgar Wright, Patty Jenkins,
Ryan Johnson who went Star Wars. I'm just gonna do what I want.
All right, so let's end this by we're gonna make ourselves omnipotent here.
Okay.
This is gonna be fun.
I always do that.
Right? Yeah, like you do. We get to be the legacy maker.
Okay.
Here.
Okay.
You get to choose one filmmaker who is not currently in that iconic echelon, in that upper echelon. You get to now appoint that filmmaker to that spot.
Ooh.
So they will be recognized alongside the greats, but you can only pick one. Who's your director? Who's your filmmaker? Who do you handpick to say, I think they deserve to be in this upper echelon, and I'm going to pluck them up and put them up there? I know it's a very easy question, which is why I'm just kind of vamping out.
Cool, great, cool.
Who would you pick?
Movie not set
Emma, it sounds like you've got somebody, so I'm going to start with you.
I have selected Patty Jenkins.
Okay.
Because I feel like we can't discount the fact that she brought this. Again, it's that conversation we were having earlier about like elevating this actor into stardom as well, and we can't discount what she did with Wonder Woman, in my opinion. And I'm so excited to see the rest of her career, and I think she's just going to continue to create films that really elevate not only her own work as a director, but also the careers of the actors who she chooses to work with. So I am selecting Patty Jenkins.
All right, Emma has elevated Patty Jenkins to join Zeus at the top of Mount Olympus. Greg Maggie.
Yeah, I mean, if not Peter Hawkins, that's fine. But I think my follow would probably be Ava.
Ava DuVernay.
Yeah, just again because of the importance of the projects that she picks, and I mean, she's becoming iconic. Like, we're starting to know exactly what her films are going to be in such a great way.
And she's another one that, much like Jordan Peele, I feel like gets press of Ava DuVernay loved it.
So everyone go see it. So, I mean, I think it's only probably a matter of like, if not within the next year, I think people will start, if they haven't already, seeing her as like one of those icon statuses.
Yes.
I got two.
You can only pick one.
Okay, I got one.
You have to pick one.
And I couldn't agree more.
All right, I'm going to go with the one I wrote down.
Okay.
I'm going to go with Sam Raimi.
Oh,
yeah.
I love Sam Raimi
I mean,
so much. much.
I feel like when he does like his huge studio films, other than like Spider-Man 1 and 2, which are amazing.
Yeah, they're
but you know, like what was Oz the Great and Powerful? Not so much.
Yeah.
But like his work on like Drag Me to Hell was amazing.
Yes,
You
so
can't
good.
dispute the fact that the Evil Dead franchise, even his like some of the best directed episodes of the show, he was behind the camera for that, and he has such a signature staple. Like only he can do what he does.
Yeah.
You know? Like there's no one else that can pull off a wide variety of like offbeat, gross out humor, but make something terrifying and hilarious simultaneously. Usually you get one or the other. Like Shaun of the Dead is a film I love, but I was like, I laugh a lot more than I am actually scared. Sam Raimi, I can be terrified and laugh in the same movie so much. So yeah, I'd say Sam Raimi.
My pick might surprise some people because I mean my heart says
Michael
Edgar
Bay.
Wright because I love Edgar
That's what I was
Wright.
going to say. That was the other one I was going
Not
to say.
Michael Bay.
Yeah, I do love Edgar Wright.
I do love Edgar Wright, but even though I'm not always a fan of his films, I'm going to say Chris Nolan.
Oh.
I know that's a bold take on the internet. I know.
But I'm also not a huge fan of all of his work, so please continue.
It reminds me a little bit of what you were saying about Kubrick and what you were saying a little bit about Godard, which is that I am not a big fan of Interstellar.
Yeah.
I was not a big fan of Dunkirk, honestly.
No.
I think he's done some brilliant movies. I think he's done some really great movies, but he understands the medium. He knows how to make a movie in a way that I think that Spielberg knows how, in a way that Kubrick knew how, in the sense that like he knows the power of what he's doing. So even though I didn't particularly care for Dunkirk aesthetically, not aesthetically, but just I didn't just the style that he had as far as the editing and how he constructed the film I wasn't a big fan of. I thought it was a stunningly cinematic achievement. Same with Interstellar. I think that like, my God, that was just an incredible use of the medium, of the form,
I
of
saw it
everything
in
else.
IMAX, and in the moment watching Interstellar, I was like, this movie's great. And then I left the theater and I was like, well, it was a great experience.
The words that were coming out of people's mouths were gobbledygook. But I think that you don't always necessarily have to like and plenty of people do like this. I think plenty of people do like how he makes movies, but I think he, more than almost anybody else, is in the old style of just understanding the weight, the power of the power you have over an audience with a 50-foot screen and the sound, the speakers. And I think that not everybody has that ability to do that, and so that's why I would put him up there. Is that even though I'm not always a huge supporter of the choices he makes in how he constructs his films and how they're written, I cannot deny the fact that he understands the power of the art form. So that's why I would put him up there.
The thing about Nolan that I find fascinating, especially today with everything going on, like streaming wars and whatever, and directors going to streaming, he makes movies where you're like, I gotta go watch it in the theaters. Like you just, you know, you have to go watch it in the theaters. And
I have to watch it, Christopher. You know, I feel like to get the full breadth of the cinematic landscape as far as what's out there available today. If Chris Nolan makes a movie, I feel like to get the full power of what he wants you to get out of that movie, you have to go see it in a theater.
And I think like when he did the IMAX cameras with like The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises, he's the only director who I truly feel utilizes that best to enhance the narrative and the experience, whereas for a lot of other movies, it can feel kind of gimmicky. For him, you're like, oh, this is so specifically fine-tuned to this moment in this particular scene that when he does a movie with IMAX cameras, I feel... I know you probably don't really feel too inclined about IMAX, do you?
I think that he uses it. I think you're right. It is a gimmick a lot of times. People just use it as a whatever. But I think that he knows. Again, he understands what he's doing.
Yeah, the craft of it.
The craft of it, and so that's why I'd put him up there, even though not always on board with what he's doing. This was fun.
This was fun.
It was fun. I like doing this.
I know we're wrapping up. Can I throw out one person really quick?
Yes.
Okay. I just finished Barry.
Oh my God.
Bill Hader, I had no idea could direct the way he does. Like, I cannot wait for him to start directing films because every episode that ended, I was like, man, who directed this? Bill Hader. That's crazy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bill Hader. Well, you know what? Let's reconvene 1 year from today on July 1st. Talk about who we think might be added to this. This is I love just talking film, talking directors, and this is a great panel. Thank you guys. Emma Fyffe, where can people find anything you want to plug?
Yeah, you can find me all over the internet at my name, Emma Fyffe. Depending on when this airs, this will be before July 6th, certainly.
Yes.
Wherein you can catch me hosting the live stream from Destination Funimation during Anime Expo. It's just twitch.tv/Funimation. I think I'll tweet about it, so follow me. But yeah, if you want to see some live coverage of some anime events, talking to some voice actors, ADR directors, producers, influencers, I guess, etc. Please check that out. It'll be starting at noon Pacific.
There'll be a link in the description.
There'll be a link in the description.
Thank you, Ryan. Maggie May Fish, where can the people find you?
Yeah, hey, you can find me on Twitter, on YouTube, on my channel, it's just my name. I have some movie video essays that if you liked this, you might find interesting.
Nice.
And I have a video coming up. It's not about movies, but it is about lipstick and how we got glass shards in our lipstick because of influencers and capitalism. So if you like Verhoeven's work, you might like that.
It sounds like a very Paul Verhoeven
like
thing.
it.
Very
Yes.
dystopian
Yes.
future with our glass lipstick. Greg Alba,
Does anyone self-declare themselves an influencer?
a lot of people do.
lot of
A lot of people declare
Such
themselves
a weird word.
Yeah, it was just
categorized
it was just
as that, but I'm
on
just-
the breakdown. It was literally on the breakdown with a question mark. For the Funimation stream, they're like influencers, maybe.
Oh, God, such a weird word.
Yeah.
I would love to meet Tarantino and be like, I'm an influencer. What the hell are you? You know?
If anybody knows about influence and being influenced, it's Quentin Tarantino.
Exactly, that's my point.
We've been born in a different time. Quentin Tarantino.
YouTube.com/The Real Rejects, upload pretty much daily, and Instagram and Twitter at the Greg Alba. I don't know which one my camera is, but I'm actually going to be hosting my first panel at Comic-Con.
cool.
It's for an 8-episode sci-fi series that's debuting on Amazon Friday, July 19th. The panel's actually Friday, July 19th. JT, put up that poster I did not send you. All right. To keep a look at, follow me so that way you know exactly when it's going to be. But come say hi. I like meeting people because I'm an influencer.
Yes. How to be friends and influence people. Yeah. I feel like it's like if you call yourself one, then you're, I don't know. It's a whole thing.
Such a weird word.
It's an odd word.
I hate the word, honestly.
Thank you for watching. We will be back live here on Fandom Entertainment on Monday. We will know what day it is, and we'll have the wrap up of anything that happened over the long weekend. Charting will be back on Monday. We'll talk about Spider-Man Far From Home and everything that happened at the box office. Until then, have a happy, safe rest of your week or weekend, or who knows? This is the fun thing. You know more than we do. That's the fun of a pre-tape. We'll see you next week.